My day-to-day job is teaching, obviously, but a lot of my time is spent doing research. And one area we've been doing some research on at Durham is looking at this challenge of helping the church get to net zero by 2030. It's been a big challenge, and over the last, 18 months or so, we've been engaging in a project which would seek to try and set out and do those aims. And we've done that with and working with the Central Church, as well as 3 churches in the region, as well as the cathedral at Durham. So as you can see here, there's been a lot of people involved, and they should take the credit, but I'm here to take the credit personally for all of it, okay? So they didn't do anything. But if anything went wrong, these are the names you need to come into contact with, because they're exactly the people that made the mistakes. But anyway, in general, it's been a large team effort, okay? I just take the credit for it, really, I guess, for coming to things like this. But basically, we looked at these particular buildings. I'm afraid you can't see the detail of them there in some of the slides, but basically, it was the cathedral itself, St. John's Church in Durham, St. Brandon's, and St. Nicholas, which is in the centre in Durham. And I think the key thing about those is we picked them on the basis of their location. One was inner city, one on the outer skirts of the city, and one was rural. They are all kind of slightly different in many different ways, and we've done a huge report associated with all of this. Hopefully that's accessible to you. I did send it in. I don't know if that's been shared, but there's a very detailed report which sits behind all of the work that I'm going to talk about. The question is, how do you decarbonise these buildings? There's a lot of options. So what we set out to do is we put some sensors in those churches. We measured humidity, temperature. We got their bills. And monitored them over a long period of time. And then we built what's called a digital twin. Those blue things there, it's not a postcard. They are individual models of the church built in a computer to represent the building physics itself. By doing that, you can then try out different kinds of technologies and see what they really do. There was a lot of work went into this, lots of analysis. This is some of the calibration of that work. But I'm going to give you quite a brief summary, really, of what the outcomes were. So the first thing we noticed, you can see from these data here, you've got the list of all the different buildings on the side. You've got how much gas they used, how much electricity they used during that time, and then the CO2 produced for each one of those churches and how much it costs to run those particular buildings. There's quite a bit of detail there, but the first piece of information is the primary challenge for decarbonisation is heating. That's the first outcome from that. So electricity is only a small part of the piece. Most of the CO2 comes from heating those buildings. So if you want to address net zero, start with the heating. You can see the big difference in costs, but in broad, they were all sort of saying the same kinds of things. The next thing we looked at was what kind of things can you do to those churches? What kind of technologies can you install in those buildings that will actually yield a positive outcome in terms of net zero, low CO2, or even lowering costs? There's a lot there. The top side one there is in the demand reduction. That is simple things like turning the heating down a little bit, installing LED lighting. These things are quite easy to do. Then the next one there is fabric efficiency, which is insulating roofs, installing secondary glazing, and then you can start to install potentially new greener technologies, solar panels, having a biomass burner, having a hydrogen burner, for example. And then down the other side, you've got different ways of having electrified heat. So across there, you've got individual pew heating, you've got electric boilers, and then at the bottom there, you've got various heat pump technologies. We hear about heat pumps, super efficient way of heating buildings. They may not work for church buildings in the way that we might hope. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So we kind of came up with this kind of tree here where we sort of map out what are the individual pathways for an individual church. And they do vary. But the first thing is you start with your building. Where are you currently? Every church is in a different place, and that's the really first thing to decide. Where are you right now? Then look at methods to reduce demand. So it could be more insulation, it could be doing smarter things in around your heating system. And then the next step is decarbonising heat, so making key choices around what pathway you're going to take in order to reach net zero. And that could be you do some carbon offsetting, for example, try to integrate with more renewables. There are factors related to the wider networks, the national electricity networks and the gas networks. They're also decarbonising as well. So it's not just, you don't have to generate all of your own electricity, for example. That's just part of the solution. So to give you an illustration really of what's included in that analysis, this is what would happen in those 4 church buildings if we decided to reduce our the temperature by 1 degree centigrade. And you can see across the piece there that by reducing by 1 degree, you can save between 1 and 3 tons per year of CO2 and also save money. So it's a very logical thing to do. But that's got to be balanced against the building itself. So if you couldn't continue to bring that temperature down until it was the same as outside, because you would start to cause issues with the actual surrounding building, any artifacts within the building. So you do have to have some level of heating in those buildings in order to maintain it. So that can only take you so far. As an illustration of kind of the value of that kind of thing, here's an example where we've looked at comparing for St Brandon's Church at the bottom there. The choice could be maybe you went for secondary glazing on all of those windows and compare that with actually reducing the temperature by 1 degree, just to give you a kind of comparison. So if you went for secondary glazing on that particular church, you'd spend $130,000 on upgrading those windows. But you wouldn't really achieve, you'd achieve less on CO2 savings than reducing by 1 degree. So to give you context, that's not a logical decision to go for secondary glazing. We would probably do it in all of our homes, but in that context and in the church building, it doesn't necessarily follow through. So those are the kind of things that are included in that report. We've also compared different heating technologies. There's a huge amount in there, lots to process, but basically in all cases, they're not economically viable to do that. It's not cheaper to switch to those technologies from gas at the moment. So making a choice to decarbonise will cost extra money. We all have to come to terms with that. There's not a quick fix on this in terms of the economics. I'll just scoot through some of these really, because we only have limited time. But we also started to look at combinations of technologies, whether you took a baseline temperature within your building. Maybe you heated with a heat pump, underfloor heating, but you kept that at a very low set point. When people come into the building, you turn on radiative heaters and you top it up. So there are different options and they're all included in there. This is a good example really about what's happening next. So the world is changing, and as time goes on, the electricity networks will decarbonise. So currently, if you installed, say, a gas, some kind of electric radiator system, at the bottom there, you'd have 3.27 tons of CO2 for your church. But then in 2035, that would more than half. So there is a progression going on outside your domain and your space, which will help you decarbonise. It's not just on yourselves. So there's some quick comments. I hope they're going to come up a bit clearer here. So there are 3 kind of major pathways that you can put forward for decarbonisation. The first is, do you wait for hydrogen? This is a really big question. I think the simplest thing is we all stay on gas and we wait for hydrogen to happen. This is the easiest for us as consumers to do, but no decision's been made by UK government on that just yet. It's not going to happen for another few years. So that's the first thing. A second is on biomass. It's quite seductive to think that we could just have a bio, but that bio and bioenergy can only contribute to a tiny proportion of what's going to happen. It can only contribute to a tiny amount of the world economy. So therefore, it's not a solution for everyone. It may only be solutions for very, very niche problems. So that can't be a solution going forward. And then the other option is electric. So that could be heat pumps, and that could be other kinds of electrification technology. They're all included in the report. You can have a look yourselves. But the outcomes of our project were really that it's very difficult to do this for church buildings. I think that there are lots of parts of the world economy which are all trying to decarbonise at the same time. There's a hierarchy of difficulty. I would put the church buildings towards the top of that list, absolutely. And that's not really necessarily feeding into national policy in and around energy in itself. And I think this project's been really valuable for us as the university, but we're feeding this information forward. We've had Lord Debon from the Climate Change Committee come to visit us, and we've taken them around the various buildings, and we've talked about this. And I think that this kind of project can actually unlock those opportunities for how this kind of thing can be done. But in essence, I think you shouldn't feel that it's just on you to reach net zero. The rest of the world will push you along with that. So it's about making a short to medium term plan, actually. What steps should your individual church take to reach net zero? Hopefully our report helps, but that may only be bespoke to those 3 or 4 churches, but you'll learn some stuff from there. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you.